All right, I think we're going to get started. It is right at 7 o'clock. I would like to just take a moment to welcome you to Centenary United Methodist Church. Please ignore the hard hats and the tape and we're under construction. So just ignore if there are messes that you see at your feet. Bathrooms, if you need them, are out the door and down the hallway past another construction zone. But welcome, and we are so excited that you are here tonight. I am Pastor Erica Kozer. I'm one of the pastors here at Centenary and one of the directors of the Connections Shelter and Connections Ministry.
I'm Pastor Colette Brody-Grund. I'm one of the pastors at Bethlehem Lutheran, just down this block, and currently on sabbatical, but this is important enough to me that I'm taking a day out of sabbatical, put on my work clothes, and show up. So thank you for being here tonight.
And I'm Jen Thieneman. I'm the Executive Director for Partners for Affordable Housing, which is the other shelter just down the street. And I'm so happy to be here and share a little bit about what we do all year round.
We will also be joined a little bit later with Mike Lavin from the City Council. He's our at-large City Council representative. He had to do another City Council thing first, and then he will be here. So we expect to see him about 7:30. Very casual tonight. We want to just share with you some of the things that are happening in our shelters, some of the ways that we're working together, and then open it up for questions that you all might have about what's happening in regards to homelessness here in Mankato. So I think we'll take a seat and then we can get started.
I'll start. So I work for Partners for Affordable Housing, and most people know us as Teresa House and Welcome Inn shelters, which literally are a block down the street, just on Broad Street. And we actually are in our 34th year from the original beginnings. We've morphed, and we continue to morph, I think, to meet the needs. And so we're pleased to be here, and certainly pleased to partner with these two ladies to address the issue of homelessness in our community. Our shelters, so they're really two old houses located next door to each other. We have 11 rooms that we can serve individuals or families, and we prioritize women and families. We don't have space, unfortunately, for single men, but they are served at the Salvation Army or through Connections. We operate year-round, and our program is a little bit different than a nightly shelter where people actually come and live with us for a while. They can stay with us up to 90 days, and during their time with us, we work one-on-one with them. We have 3 staff that are located down there that work with them during the day, and then support staff that work overnights because they're obviously they're still sleeping there. But our day staff especially really work with people to identify what are their barriers to housing, and it's a mixture of things. It's really, it's employment, it's transportation, it's childcare, it's a number of things, maybe past history in terms of incarceration or substance abuse or any of those type of things. And so we kind of identify all of those barriers and sometimes kind of uncover things that people didn't realize maybe are a barrier to people that are on the other end, a landlord or something like that. So, and we help them. We give them resources. We walk alongside them. Sometimes people come to us and they don't have a birth certificate or their social security card. Well, you can't go and rent an apartment if you don't have those things. So it's really a mixture of things. There's really not a lot that we won't help them with in terms of our end goal, which is always housing. But along those lines too, just to have a place to stay isn't enough to sustain someone. So, we help with transportation in a number of ways. We get them to Echo Food Shelf. We help them sign up for food benefits. There's oftentimes a lot of things that people don't realize that they could qualify for, especially if they've never been homeless before, didn't grow up in that kind of environment. Maybe they've just found themselves as homeless, and now it's kind of in a crisis, like what do I do next? I don't have a place to stay and don't have money for food and all of those things. So just have an amazing team that are just really dedicated to helping the people right in front of them, their family, all the unique needs that they have, and really help build them up too, because self-esteem often is something that kind of falls to the wayside. People feel like failures, and it's just a bad spot in their life, hopefully, and we can help them kind of get back on their feet and moving forward. So that's our shelter program. We also have a transitional housing program, which is kind of a next step where we'll provide financial assistance for up to 24 months once they find an apartment. So they're still considered homeless because it's not a permanent plan. We're providing assistance, but at the end of that assistance, if they're not able to sustain that, they could find themselves homeless again. Excuse me. But we do that with supportive services, with a case manager as well, to again help them with employment and food and transportation, childcare, all of those things. And then we also have permanent housing around town as well. We have 3 houses and 31 apartments that we charge below market rent. And we don't have, I would say, the typical barriers that most landlords might have. If people have past evictions or a criminal record or all of those things, we kind of overlook that because, again, our goal is to get them housed and in the right place for them. So we have those units available, and if people do live there while they're in a transitional housing program and then have found employment and can sustain it after that, they can continue to live there, and it works quite well. And then the last program that most people know about, or we like to share, is we have what's called a free store. And it is a place, our offices are actually at Good Counsel Hill. We rent some space up there, and they've given us a space for free for this free store, a lot of free going on. And we ask for donations of pretty much anything that you can imagine is in a home. Oftentimes people, when they're homeless and they're moving from place to place, they don't keep a lot of things, right? They just keep basic necessities and clothes and that type of thing. So when they do find housing, they kind of find themselves with, I don't have anything to outfit a home. And so we get donations from community members of everything from pots and pans and silverware, pillows, bedding, winter coats, furniture, you name it, we'll pretty much accept it. And then it's available for them to come and shop. So when they are, whether they work with us or they work with another community agency, they can come and shop in this store and take as much as they need. We're not there to judge, but whatever they need, we'll help them load it up and get it to their new place, and it's all at no cost, which is pretty important, because if you think of all the things that you would need to outfit your home and you went to Salvation Army or Goodwill and bought all those things, that would even be a barrier. You wouldn't be able to afford all of that. So that's a really important program that we're pleased to offer the community as well. So I think I covered pretty much all of it in a nutshell.
All right, so about a year ago at this time, several of you were probably in this room with us, and we had hatched this crazy idea that we were going to start an emergency shelter that could fill some of those gaps that Partners wasn't able to fill. We were seeing through our Holy Grounds breakfast program here at Centenary that a lot of people were not able to find a place to be in an emergency situation in the winter months. And as churches, we kind of came together and said, well, what would it look like if we did this? So now we want to share with you what it looked like, because we did it. And we did it, I think, pretty well for our first year out of the gates. So we will have these fast facts available for any of you afterwards if you would like to take a copy home with you. But we'll just share a few of them with you now.
All right, so we opened at the very end of October last year, and we're open until just before the last snowstorm. So mid-April. We're already trying to figure out how we stay open a little bit longer to make sure that winter is over. You never know in Minnesota. But we were open for 164 nights, which is a huge number. We were surprised by that, I think. And in those 164 nights, we saw 178 different people. And they stayed for various lengths. Some of them were there for just 1 or 2 days. I think our longest staying guest was there for 150 out of 164 days. And he's already trying to figure out when we're opening again so he can come back and stay with us. So we made some good friends, actually, over the season, those ones especially that we saw for length of time. Many of those who stayed with us and then got shelter continued to come back and visit at holy grounds or to show up at church events and tell us how they were doing. So it's been really fun to follow some of those, and some of them actually ended up with partners and went through their program and are doing really well. So fun to see all of those 178 people, whether it was just for an emergency situation of a couple days or whether they were with us for the whole winter.
Of that 178, 102 of them were men, 45 of them were women, and 31 of them were children. And we counted children, anybody under 18 was considered a child. So yeah, it was a wide variety. We had, I think our youngest one, and staff can tell me, I think our youngest kiddo was probably 6 or 7 months old. So we saw lots of babies. Let's see. A third of our guests, so 60 of the guests that stayed with us, moved from the shelter into stable housing. And since this was done, we've had another 4 or 5 who have gotten stable housing over the course of summer. A lot of that, I think, stems from the relationship that we were able to build and just sort of that cheerleading that we could do, and having a stable place to be, not worrying about where am I going to be tonight, where am I going to sleep, knowing they had a stable place to sleep, and then how can they start working on that next piece, which is getting housing, and again, all the resources in the community and really hooking people up with that. So that's been an exciting piece to see that from that emergency shelter, we were able to get 60 individuals housed relatively permanently, hopefully. So, hopefully.
We'll see how permanent when we open again.
Exactly, exactly.
See how many of them show up that were housed.
Yes.
One of the things that was really beautiful about this experience that wasn't just about providing shelter was that we got to meet a whole lot of community members, because we had 350 people that volunteered, more than that, but that's our closest count that we can come to, from various churches, from the college, people who had no connection to churches and just really liked the program. So I see people all the time now around town that I have worked with on this project. And some of the things that I hear from them is that it changed the way that they understood homelessness and that they can't stop talking about it to their neighbors. So there are 350 new ambassadors for the homeless in this community, which is incredibly powerful. And I think Mike can tell us a little bit more about that effect that it's already having on the community. But that is really exciting to know that people understand more about what homelessness is. There's faces and stories and friends that they have now that are homeless, and they can tell their family members and their neighbors about what it actually looks like and what are some of the solutions that actually work. So there's a lot of education going on too, which is something that we didn't plan on. That wasn't the prime motivator, but it's a great side effect.
The shelter quickly reached capacity once we opened. We had set our capacity at 25, and within 3 weeks we reached that capacity. There were many nights when we went over capacity because it was freezing outside or a blizzard. It was a rough winter. I think our biggest night was 34 guests, and we were sticking people wherever we could find spots to put a bed, and churches were really willing to do that. We did turn people away. We would get calls from the cities. We would get calls from outstate saying, I'm going to come to your community. Do you have a bed? And if we were at capacity, we had to say, no. But I don't think I can't think of any times that we turned anybody away that was actually here on site that showed up for a bed, unless there was a reason why they weren't able to stay with us. We started out with 6 churches at the beginning of the season that hosted, and by the end we had 8 churches, and we are trying to get to 12 for this year. So if you are involved in a church community that didn't host this last year, we know so much more about it and can tell you lots more about how to make it a successful experience. But the more churches we have, the longer we can stay open and the more guests we can serve. Anything else?
One of the things at this time last year that we didn't know was what problems we were going to face. And we tried really hard not to drill down deep into all of the possible problems. Partly because we were scared
Never guessed.
that no one would ever volunteer if they knew all of the worst possible scenarios, but also because we wanted to keep ourselves open to the possibilities and to not see it as these people bring potential problems, but they're people first and we'll see what we get. And partly because of that attitude, I think. We may also have just been really lucky or blessed, but partly because we were able to treat people as people first, with their problems coming in later on. They were very respectful, all of our guests. We had very few incidents. Public safety did have to be called a few times. It was almost always a mental health issue, even if we didn't know that it was a mental health issue at the time. And I think it was really only 6 times out of the whole season that we had to call. So that's pretty impressive for 178 people. We only had 6 times that we had to call public safety, and none of those were like big mess emergency situations. It was mostly, we need this person to be in a safer spot than we're able to provide, because if you've ever slept overnight in a church, you know it's not the most comfortable, it's not the most private. Some of it, the mental health stuff, we were crowded some nights, and people with mental health issues cannot always be around large groups of other people. So that was part of it too. But we just were really impressed by how respectful all of our volunteers and guests were of each other. So we hope that we will have another blessed and lucky and respectful season.
All right, so Mike Lavin has joined us up here. Mike is our, like I said, our city council member, at-large city council member, and also a member of Centenary, and also very involved in the Connection Shelter, so you may have a slight bias.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
And I can say, recognizing most of you, as a coordinator here for volunteers, I think I've seen most of you, whether it be on the intake or on the Sunday handoff, and certainly in the weeks that we hosted here, that some of you volunteered for the various roles. As mentioned already, one of the selling points I kept telling people, I'm like, if you just want to try it out, come here in the morning to wake everybody up, because all you do is you brew coffee, you turn on lights, and everybody wake up, and that's it. And so it was actually relatively easy to volunteer in any capacity here. One of my thoughts personally was I need to understand this from a lot of perspectives. So the very initial week we hosted, I did try every role that we offered, including staying with the staff overnight, just to get an idea of what that looks like from beginning to end. And as mentioned, it's really relatively easy, quick, and fun. As a perspective from a council member, it was like, okay, clearly something's wrong in the community in the context of we have to have an emergency shelter, but we have shelters. So where are we disconnecting? And at first, the initial thought is, well, clearly the city needs to spend more money on this because that's the problem. There's not enough money behind it. Well, if that was only the issue. And Jen, I know, is one of our partners in this process, is that there's a certain amount of money available to fund and to help and assist homelessness in Mankato. But it's certainly not a large amount of cash to really address all the needs that are in place. With that said, and Colette alluded to it, as we looked at how to redevelop the Lamb Street property where the city public works department right behind Cub West was prior to moving up on Victory Drive. What do we do with this property? We had 3 proposals come forth. One of them was from a group out of Missouri, which was a feather in our cap that Mankato's getting noticed a little bit outside of Minnesota. And then 2 groups actually collaborated with Minnesota companies and organizations to try to make something go there. And 2 of the proposals by no means were horrible. They were very good proposals, but they're things we've already seen. You put in some commercial property on the first floor, and then you do market rate apartment housing on 2nd and 3rd floors. Well, we have that in Mankato, and there's various, whether you look at the University Plaza area or at various spots around town, those type of properties exist. But a 3rd proposal that caught my eye, as well as the rest of us on the council, was the collaborative nature with the Southern Minnesota Housing Partnership, where we're going to put in some housing that is going to have the ability to work with people who have, needs is not the right word, but that's what comes in my head right now. They're going to be able to have services there and provided to help them assist them. So I'll say it's graduated housing. It's not homeless directly, but it's graduated. One of their proposal pieces includes, as the development phases in, is a daycare facility on site, as well as open to the public. So when you think about that property from the side by Cub all the way, it really goes towards the Children's Museum. The development actually blends quite well with what's already there, in both in size and scope. What's interesting, as we were discussing this project, we found out the folks who have Elite Steaks and Shop, they're considering selling that property. So they're interested in the fact that they're looking at probably 2020 potentially selling that property, and these other developments going on, and all of a sudden their property value and the interest of it has grown, because all of a sudden people want to be next to what's going on down there, and how would it complement that? So that's a nice, kind of, I'll say, a nice little ripple in the wave as things have changed. Now, that being said, it doesn't address homelessness directly. We still have a long way to go. I think what the shelter did from the city's perspective is it took our city staff a few moments to kind of understand, okay, is there things we can help them with, or is there not? How does it work? Well, when we work with Jen at Affordable Housing, at Partners for Affordable Housing, data-driven information, it helps that funding stream come really understandably clear for us and for her. And so that's, as the city staff continue to look at what success is happening here with this emergency shelter through the churches, okay, how do we get the data? How do we make it so we can access funds to be able to help make this a community-wide project? Now, having it at locations each week maybe stresses that data collection, maybe it doesn't. But as you continue to look forward to what is in the future for Mankato, I think we have a little bit better idea. And as you mentioned, over 300 people have touched this and started to wonder what's going on. We're light years ahead of where we were a year ago as a community. And I'd say I'm proud, and bias is the right word as well, that I knew it when. But I look across this crowd, and there's a lot of faces here that really made this hit home for me as an individual, but also as an elected leader, because holy cow, we've got a lot of work to do. But it's a lot easier to see the challenge with several hundred people with you, as opposed to you're just climbing a mountain by yourself and hoping to God it gets done. But I'm looking forward to this next year.
All right. So I think that kind of opens up what's next. When we finished the season, I think Colette and I were kind of delirious by the time we got to the end, maybe just a little bit. And it was like, okay, we're going to do a day shelter because that's what's really needed. It is really needed in our community. We are finding more and more as we meet with people who have now become our friends that they are getting closed out of places all around town, and there aren't places to be during the day. So a day shelter is something that we think is very important, but we kind of ran out of steam to keep that going. And she went on sabbatical, so what the heck? But that is certainly something that we are talking about and looking at ways that we can find places during the day that it's safe for people to be. If you're working a third shift job, which a lot of the people that came through the shelter, that's what they could get hired at coming in. You're working a third shift, you're not sleeping. And you can, come in and we had a couple people come in and they get in, they check in, they go right to bed, and then we'd have to wake them up and get them in a cab to work by, 1, 2 in the morning, so they're just not getting good sleep. So that day sleeping piece is big. Somewhere to keep your stuff. We didn't realize that stuff was going to become kind of a thing. But if you have your possessions in 3 duffel bags, you don't want to have to take them with you all day. So where are safe places to keep your stuff? And then where are just safe places to be, to just sit, to read a book, to relax, to enjoy. So that's one of the things that as a community, I think it has really opened our eyes to the fact that that is a really necessary piece of what's next. What else, ladies?
Well, I think what's next eventually is more permanent year-round shelter. I don't know what your numbers were for this year at Partners, but I know you have a huge list of people that call and they go on the list for getting housing, and there just isn't enough. The emergency housing, I feel like we could bump that number up probably, but it's really the transitional piece, because it takes a long time for people to go from homelessness to stability, where they're really able to go on their own. And so to be able to walk with people through that, you need time. And as a seasonal shelter, we ran out of time. At the very end of the season especially, there were people that we just had to say, I'm sorry, I don't know where you're gonna sleep tonight. We're closing and we don't have an answer for you. And some of them we were able to keep working with. Some of them other organizations are working with, and Jen, maybe you can say a little bit more about the expansion that you guys are thinking about and planning for. But we need more of that longer term transition, as well as more emergency beds. But that transitional piece is so, so important, because you can't, especially for some of our chronically homeless, there are so many barriers that even if you're working with people every day, all day long, it's gonna take months or maybe even years, depending on their situation, to move from being in the emergency shelter to being in an apartment where they're not gonna get kicked out. Do you wanna say more about some of the future plans for Partners?
Well, yeah, I think I'll maybe piggyback on a couple of things that you were saying. I would agree, transitional housing is super important as long as there's some kind of financial support. Ours comes from the state, which comes from the government, and there's a cap on that. They had a little bit of money that was suddenly available, $200,000, and I think there was 80 applicants in the state. We didn't get it. Unfortunately. Just a huge, huge need for financial assistance, which when people are getting back on their feet, just that little something to help supplement, especially, I mean, we have a lot of people that are living in shelter that are working, but they have, in order to get into housing, they've got to save up quite a bit of money. There are area landlords that require not only deposit, which is 1 month's rent, first month's rent, last month's rent, and sometimes second to last month's rent. We had a gal who needed $4,000 to be able to move into an apartment with her children with no rental history.
How many of you could do that right now? Probably not many of us.
Scary stuff. But in order for her to be stable for her children and all of that, that's what was required. Sometimes there's resources and a lot of effort, not only from our staff, but also from that person. It takes a lot of effort to go through to this door and say, can you help me with money? Can you help me with money? Time that they don't have if they're working and taking care of their kids and trying to get their life back on track. So I think as a society, there are resources available. There's never enough, but we make them jump through a lot of hoops to get to that stable housing piece. It's not enough to just get that job and then, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I always say sometimes people don't have bootstraps, so how do they get there? This town is vibrant. We're hearing that, how there's businesses that are hiring, unemployment rate is really low. Unfortunately, like you said, There's second shift jobs, there's third shift jobs. If people don't have transportation to get to the job, they might be walking 4 miles in the dead of night to get to that job. If they have children, there are not daycare centers that are open, that are open for second and third shift. So there's always barriers, and sometimes those jobs pay $12 an hour, $16 an hour, might not have benefits that help the family either, especially if they have a part-time job. So it's just really hard for people to sustain. The other thing that I would add to your list is affordable housing. There is such a demand for housing in this area, and for a number of reasons. I've heard that there's not affordable senior housing, so people aren't moving out of single-family homes into maybe a more suitable senior environment where there's less upkeep and all of that. There's just not affordable options, so they're not moving out of single-family homes, which might be perfect for a young family. Obviously, having the colleges in the area, there's huge demand for apartments because there's not dorms for people to live in. There's just huge demand. The prices are very competitive, and they can charge really whatever they want. So it's not necessarily an affordable rental rate, especially if the people that are paying for them are maybe parents that live outside of the community, but they're paying whatever it takes for their student to live in the area. So there's huge demand. The prices are high and set pretty high. So I would say affordable housing, which doesn't take up so much of someone's income. Blue Earth County area is a severe cost burden area where 30% of people have to pay 50% or more of their wages to just have a place to live. It doesn't include insurance or outfitting it or daycare or transportation, food, any of those things. So it's hard. It's easy to figure out how it's hard for people to make it work, and when they can't make it work, if they lose their job or get sick and are evicted, now that's on their record from here on out. So sometimes it can just take one little incident that they don't have control over that can really put them on a really challenging path going forward. So that's my soapbox there. As far as what we have, and you've probably heard it, we've had some hope for a larger shelter somewhere in town for a number of years, and that still is in our vision. Our board of directors just had a strategic planning session and confirmed, yes, that's still something that we hope for. Obviously, raising money is the barrier for us. And so we continue to look and see what properties are available. This area downtown is quite a great location for us because it's in walking distance to breakfast, lunch at the Salvation Army, close to city, close to county, and other services as well. So it's really, an ideal spot for us to be in now, and we hope that some property will be available here in Mankato, and we'll likely be launching a capital campaign to help build a larger shelter so we can help more people, as well as get everything that we have, our staff and our free store and everything under one roof as well for efficiency for us. Some of you may have heard about a little thing that happened in St. Peter in June, which was an amazing gift from a private group who bought the St. Peter Motel for us with the intention to operate a shelter in that environment. We get calls really from all over. We're part of a 20-county continuum of care, so anybody in that 20-county region can certainly contact us, but generally, people that need to stay in Mankato before they can be served in shelter. But we have always gotten people calling us from St. Peter, Le Sueur, and that whole area, so we were really thrilled that they wanted to do that and that they saw the need. And in talking with their St. Peter Community Development Manager, they're really excited to kind of be on the forefront of addressing that and are really supportive of that option for us and have not heard anything bad about potential issues with having a shelter or anything like that. So we need to raise some money to make some necessary renovations to do that, as well as operate. When it's a shelter, there's not money coming in, so we need money to actually, pay the bills, pay the utilities, pay some staff because we'd like to have case management services there just like we do here. Not enough just to give someone a place to stay, but how can we help them with all the things that they need to address to get back on track. So we're thrilled to be able to do that. And we're shooting for probably spring once we raise some money and kind of get our plan in place and some renovations decided on. There's 13 spaces. We'll probably leave a couple for some long-term rentals, kind of more of a transitional housing thing, and then make some space for some communal living. And that's what our shelters look like, is they have common living room, common kitchen, common bathroom, and they just have a room to sleep in that's private. But when you're talking about 6 police calls, and I don't know that we've had that many in the last year, but I just think of like how many people you have a night and they're all in an open environment. Like, if you did that, do you think everybody would be able to get along? No, that would not happen. It's always interesting to me to see new people move into our place, and just see how they interact with people. Complete strangers. You know, some have kids, some don't. Some are introverts and like to keep to themselves, and some are really outgoing. You put all these strangers in a place and see how it goes. And it's not always perfect, and sometimes we have to mediate, but it's really, really special to see the friendships that come together, and we can provide support, but often that peer-to-peer support is pretty incredible. Someone with lived experience in being homeless, supporting someone else that's going through that same thing, and likely other things that have gone on in their life. So pretty exciting. But yeah, we see the need, and we agree with a day option. I know the library has been talking with us about their concerns about people going to the library during the day and maybe scaring people away that are there to use library services. And I think it's hard. It's hard to know where can people go safely so they're not disrupting other people, but sleep and rest and deal with a really challenging life, whether or not you have mental health concerns, and that is a challenge for a lot of the people that we serve. And one more thing I'll add, you were going through your demographics, so we serve families and single women, and a family unit for us can be whatever makeup that looks like. We've had a dad and his daughter, we've had mom and grandma and kids, husband and wife and kids, mom and kids, kind of any combination of a family that you can have. But what was most surprising to me when I joined Partners was that about usually between 45 and 47% of the people that we serve in shelter are children. And I think that was the most eye-opening thing, and what I always try to share with people. That stereotypical homeless person is not who we have living in Mankato. They're not, there's no cardboard signs at the exit ramps or people pushing carts. It's the kids that your kids or your grandkids are going to school with that are staying in our shelter sometimes, and their parents are working really hard and trying to juggle all of those things. And so I'm just thrilled that the community has been talking about it. I'm so thrilled that you are all here and supporting them, and in turn supporting us, because we can't meet the need. And sometimes we share clients, so it's really thrilling to see how interested and engaged the community is about this topic.
I think that's the one thing too that's really important to understand. We're not territorial. That's like, there are people, there are your people. We really do try and work as much together as we can. And so as Partners, as their board and they're launching, they've obviously been doing this a lot longer than Connections has. And so if something comes up that it's like, how can we help? How can we partner? How can we do this together? And it's gonna take all of us. The 4 of us can't solve this problem. It's gonna take all of us raising money, raising awareness, keeping our ears out for buildings that are available, talking to those developers that we know that are our next door neighbor, or that we golf with, or whatever it might be, to say, how can you make a difference? How can you help? Because that's what it's gonna take. It's gonna take those connections, that networking, those people that we all know, and kind of planting seeds and being that annoying little sister. Come on, because we're developing rapidly in Mankato right now, and things, we'll get an idea, we're like, oh, we should check into that building, and then the next day you drive by and it's sold already. And so it's gonna take all of us to solve this and to figure out how we help this population, we help these friends and these family members move to more stability in their lives. So I think with that, let's open it up. If there are questions you have about any of our programming, how the last year went, ideas you want to set forth, questions for the city, we'll open it up. Yeah.
Is the, for the city council, is the project that's being developed over by the Cub West, I think you referred to it, does that include affordable housing?
Yes, the project on Lamb Street and the redevelopment does include affordable housing. Part of the tax credit that the Southwest Partners are applying for does require, and is part of that, is affordable housing, both from a voucher perspective as well as market rates. It's interesting because part of that tax credit requires them to put a large amount of cash in the bank at the very front end. So when that development came forward, the price tag per unit was a little over $230,000 per unit. Now, when you talk to folks like Mike Drummer, who's building a lot of apartments in town, the ones behind Hy-Vee on the east end of town, for instance, he's running about $110,000 to $115,000 unit. So then, of course, someone says, well, why is it going to cost twice as much for this? Because is that the government squandering our money? No, what the requirement is that they put all the money for the maintenance and upkeep over 20 years up front now, so as the unit is being used and it goes through over 20 years worth of life, no different than our houses, that there's money there to maintain the property as is. So at the end of 20 years, when the tax credit runs out, that property should be as if it was the first day it was open. Now, it's going to be dated cosmetically, because 20 years, I mean, I try not to wear my clothes from 20 years ago. I try. I had to stop for a second and go, what am I wearing? Anyway, so that being said, so that's where some of that cost comes in at the front end, and it's very big numbers. So this is approximately a $18 million project for the first building, but again, half of that is really money up front for the life of that building for the first 20 years. So it's a little, at first it sounds like an unfair comparison, but when you understand where some of that comes in, now all of a sudden you're saying, well, 230,000, well, that'd be 115. Well, gee, that's about the same that what an at market rate apartment building is being built for today. Oh, okay, so that isn't really, it's not sure to be fancy, but it certainly isn't going to be so stick, slow grow that it'll be something that needs to be remodeled in a week. It's gonna have a life to it.
Nice. Well, how would you characterize the attitudes, if you will, of your colleagues on the council? Are they warm to the idea of dealing with affordable housing in the community? Are they ready to go, or are they?
In general, I think this last year, it was an eye-opener for most of them. Now, I'll back up. I had been on the council from 2000 to 2012, lost an election in 2012, so was gone for 4 years. That gave me an opportunity to really open my eyes and ears and listen to what people were really talking about, because I had gotten complacent, for lack of a better way to say it. So one of the things that the opportunity, as this came up, it's like, oh yeah, we should be involved, because what is in place isn't any different. When I first got elected in 2000, we had Partners for Affordable Housing, relationship with the city there, and then the Salvation Army, and that was it. So here it is in 2018, and this is the new kid on the block, so to speak. And so my colleagues have started to go, what do we need to do differently? Are there dollars we can leverage? Are there more programming dollars that we can access? In general, no. The federal government doesn't have any money for this. They just really shift the dollars around and kind of formulate different ways to allocate it. The only way we're able to get vouchers is really to have projects like the one on Lamb Street show up that really, in essence, is going to pay for a voucher through the funding of it. It's not going to take a voucher away from Partners to give to this project. It's another voucher, but they're in essence paying for it by that project size. with that said, there's, this is going to sound very political, because Minnesota is a state that has actually tried to take care of itself and it's all of its people, different than states that are more dependent on federal programming. I'll use one example like Mississippi, and not to knock Mississippi, but they get more money for federal housing than Minnesota. But they've chosen not to engage as a state the way the state of Minnesota does. So a lot of the programming that Jen has access to, Mississippi doesn't have. But that being said, it's a bittersweet pill. We've kind of decided we want to be part of this process. So there's more money there, but we'd have to change a lot of other programming to make the state available for federal funding on a larger scale.
All right, got one here, and then we'll go back there. Yeah.
I was wondering about homeless teenagers. Do you provide housing together in this program?
Yes, we do. We'll take. Oh, okay. Her question was homeless teenagers, and do we provide housing for homeless teenagers? Yes, we partnered a lot with the Reach over the winter year, and they run their day shelter for homeless teens in Mankato, and we had a significant number of our young people were teenagers. Yeah. Yeah, Becky.
You spoke about the volunteer staff. I wonder how it worked with the paid staff that you have, this past year for the connections.
So we had, over the course of the season, 6, 7 paid staff? 7, 8, I'm not sure. We started with 5, 4 overnights and a manager. We transitioned managers in the middle of the season and added 2 more, so whatever number that is. Math is not my strong suit anyway. But the paid staff, we found out, were really essential to making congregations feel like they were able to jump in, because they knew in the wee hours when all of the weird stuff happens that there would be somebody with a little bit more training, somebody who was responsible for that. We had excellent staff. The overnight staff especially were just amazing. The problem solving that they did when nobody else was around, and without waking us up in the middle of the night too often. Those relationships between the staff, we had them work 2 at a time always, so there was always somebody to consult with, and for safety reasons, and the relationships they had with each other and then with the guests, they were really able to keep a lid on things that could have been big problems, and to see them starting so that we were able to address them during the day, to pull people aside, to provide alternative housing for those who were about ready to crack and needed a break. So we did a lot of problem solving, and much of that was on the staff. So we really could not have done what we did without those staff, and we are intending to staff it in a very similar way with 2 overnights always, and then a manager who will sort of oversee the overnight staff and will help with the transition time into shelter each night and the intake. So that worked well, and we are intending to do it the same way.
So that's where the bulk of our expenses come from, is into staffing. Yeah.
I have a question and comment. I understand that there is a program or an effort every few months or maybe every year to actually count the homeless, and somehow, I don't know how, that is tied to funding for this community problem. What I do know is that program wildly underestimates the amount of homeless in Mankato, because for whatever reason, people do not want to be counted. And I was just wondering if there was some way people had thought of to address that problem.
I think I'll just real quick, and then I think you probably have lots more understanding of this than I do. But the Free Press actually did a great article on that this year, and that the numbers went up significantly this year. And so if you looked at the percentages from last year's homelessness to what the count was this year, it's usually done right away in the beginning of January, end of January, I think. January 25th, I think, was the count. That the numbers were considerably higher, and so it looked like we had a much higher number. And it ended up that we just were counting better. We were counting more. We knew we had better access to people. We knew where people were. We were able to do better follow-up. But yeah, you're right. It's a faulty system because you have to do that one-on-one connection, and we don't always have that opportunity. I think as we're able to continue to house more people, as we're continuing to build those relationships, and talk about why that count is so important, because it is tied to funding dollars, that's helpful. But that's a whole education piece that goes along with it. Would you add?
Yeah, so the point in time count actually is a much larger program, obviously, and they're counting where are people staying in one night in time, every year. And then there's also the Wilder study, which is actually happening in October, and that's an every 3-year count that's done by a separate foundation. The numbers are extremely low compared to how many people are actually homeless, and I think that's, one, we have to find people. And so numbers change, where they live changes. We don't always know how to get a hold of people to know, are you still homeless, or have you found permanent housing? We don't always know. Are they still in the area? Have they moved? All of that. But I think another important thing is a lot of people don't consider themselves homeless. Whether they're doubled up, someone sleeping on a couch, or they're doubled up with another family, a family living with a family, their own family member, or just people that they know. They don't consider themselves homeless, and they're not on anybody's radar because they've not said, I need a place to stay. And that certainly happens with community members, and in the news they're talking about how many college students that's affecting. It's expensive to go to college, and that a lot of college students in this community are doubling up as well. There are people that prefer to live off the grid in the woods or other places too. They don't want to be labeled as homeless, and I think that's some of the people that we serve, they're labeled as low income, unemployable, all of these labels, and homeless is just another label that people don't necessarily want. So I think that number is always going to be low, just because people don't consider themselves homeless. They don't want to be labeled as homeless. There's no way we can possibly reach all these unreachable people. Even if people have cell phones, and there are cell phone programs out there, if they run out of minutes, they can't accept a phone call. And so we've even been talking about the point in time count. How can we reach out to people? I think you can reach out to more people because you're meeting them for breakfast. There's outreach at lunch at Salvation Army. But so we've talked about, can we text them? Because people that have run out of minutes can get text messages. So we're also talking about how can we creatively connect with people. Can we have events, community events, where people that are low income might come to that we can catch? So that number will always be misleading, I think.
I'll have another comment. There was a program that was done a while ago. They attempted to hold it every 3 or 4 months, called Free for All. And that went by the boards, I guess. That hasn't happened in a while. But I think you're right. At events like that, where there is stuff to get, people will come and they can be interviewed.
I think the event is Fair for All.
Could you repeat that?
No, there's also a free.
Oh, a Free for All event? That doesn't ring a bell. He just said, when there are events, sometimes, people kind of come out of the woodwork and you can catch them, although we're not necessarily counting. So unless there's outreach workers that are, waiting to get somebody assessed and on, we have a homeless management information system, which is a statewide system that we can actually, some providers can track. So we do an assessment tool, we get their information in the system, and then that can be shared. So if someone's working with MVAC in town and Salvation Army and us and the county, their information needed to be only shared with one agency who puts it in this system, and then we can all see who are they working with, what applications are in process, and all of that. But a lot of us are nonprofits, and so we don't have money to just have outreach workers sitting at places every day to do assessments and vulnerability indexes when someone might stop in. So there's a lot of people that are off the radar.
Let's see. Oh, we got lots of questions. Okay.
How did we finish financially?
Financially, Connections ended up with a little bit still in the bank. I believe, anybody that was at the board meeting remember where, I believe we have about 14,000 in our account right now.
And what did it cost a month to run the program?
Monthly fees, I don't know if I can tell you off the top of my head for month. The entire shelter season was 54,000.
And so, did you figure
So
out what it cost you
per night, it's $15 a night to host.
Which
A
you
person.
might have noticed when you came in, there were some little glowing credit card readers that say $15 on them. That's the reason they say $15, because for one person for one night, that's what it costs to stay at Connection Shelter. So if you would be willing, before you leave tonight, to stick your credit card in there and give $15, then you know you've provided shelter for one person. You can stick it in multiple times if you want to.
It lights up and it sings you a little song.
It makes a little noise. It's really a lovely experience. So that number is the one that we'll be working with when we start our. We haven't officially kicked off our fundraising for this shelter season yet. So you will hear more from us. If you're not on our mailing list, make sure you give us your information before you go tonight. But if you were involved as a volunteer this last year, you will get more information from us as we kick off that fundraising campaign, and we will have all of those dollars broken down about what it costs per week, per month. Again, most of the cost for the shelter is to pay the staff to be there. I don't know
Lori.
who was next, yeah.
We'll do Lori, and then we'll come up here.
At the present time, do you know how many churches have committed for the next season?
I believe we are at a firm 8, and we have 2 that we believe will be coming on. So,
I have one more question.
yeah.
Have you worked on a strategy to solve the issue of the many men that we served last year, and there were empty beds at the Salvation Army? Have you worked on a strategy to solve that problem?
No. So I laugh, not because it's funny, because it actually isn't funny, that there are empty beds. There were empty beds every night at the Salvation Army. If you're not aware of that, I encourage you to ask around to get more information about why that is. And that would be one of the things that could really help Connection Shelter, especially, be able to serve more people, is if we had more partnership with the Salvation Army. We have tried, and I know Partners has tried as well, and have not been very successful, so that's one of the things that we continue to work on. Many of the men that stayed with us, and we didn't figure out the percentages at the end of the season, but I know when we were halfway through the season, of the men that were staying with us, 40% of them had stayed at the Salvation Army in previous years, and for one reason or another, were not staying any longer. So there's more that we could be doing as a community with the space that we already have that is operational, but it would require more cooperation than we have had in the past. And if anyone has ideas about how to increase that cooperation, we would be glad to hear them.
I'm concerned about the United Way funding the Salvation Army program for that. And does somebody in the community have some influence over that grant that isn't being used?
That would be the United Way and their board and the folks who help dole out those dollars. That would be able to help make that process probably meet our community needs, if I understand you correctly. Mrs. Ruthenbeck, if I'm understanding you correctly. So, and I think that's the discussion that has been danced around for the last year. And I say that not as a person who got involved with this shelter, but it's something I recall back in the early 2000s, we worked with the Salvation Army as a city to put together a redevelopment of their property to make it more functional as a homeless shelter. To the point that the city lined up all the funding ducks in a row and said, here you go. And at the time, they said as a board and as a local entity, no thank you. I know that's the plan we have on the books for Partners for Affordable Housing is when they've got the building, we already have in our mind, we've got dollars that they can use to be able to make that because we'll leverage those federal housing dollars to make that a reality. The process that Jen mentioned earlier where they're at, I mean, they're literally a step away from that happening compared to where we were with the Salvation Army. And that's really where we're going to have to, again, I think it's the community needs to have that discussion and say to the United Way, these are dollars we're raising locally, and we think that they're not being used in that manner, in the right manner, the way we want them to be used. Or can we change that? Can we ask them to open up their process to facilitate their needs and our community needs? I mean, part of me looks at the building and says, everything on the left-hand side of where the kitchen and dining area is empty. And then on the right-hand side where their worship space is it's not as big as this, but gosh darn, it's pretty empty when on worship days. So I keep thinking, boy, if we wanted to house 300 people,
There's room.
there's room. If we want a permanent shelter facility year-round all day, there's room. So I look and think, boy, these two are beating their heads against the wall looking for an empty building and think, God, someone's just going to show up with a bunch of money and give it to them, and then they're going to be able to put it in next year. But we've got a facility in town. And again, I say that not as a discredit to the Salvation Army, but yet, as what our community has seen, and again, I think not just the people in this room, but our community over the last year has really changed their perspective on where we're at. We're not there yet. Everybody still doesn't understand homelessness the way everybody in this room does. I mean, we're advocates. But boy, we have a partner that we need to bring into this conversation. And as all of us as members of family know, sometimes those conversations are hard. Sometimes there's kicking and screaming, and sometimes people don't get what they want. But gosh darn it, our community says there's a need, and we want to make action a reality. And I think that's where we're trying to find that happy spot.
Your voices and your dollars. We'll be glad. Okay.
If,
in the back.
sorry, if
Oh.
I could just add one more
Yeah.
thing to that. We are funded, Partners for Affordable Housing are funded by United Way as well. And as part of that grant process, we have to submit a grant, and then there's a group of community members that come and we have to present all of our information. They get all of our financials, we have to talk about our programs, and they vet that and decide how much money we're gonna get. Are they gonna give us what we're asking for, more or less? So I would suggest calling them and say, I'm interested in being on a community impact team. That's what they're called. And you can be part of that because it's made up of community members.
I will say there was a Connections volunteer that was on the Community Impact Board for the Salvation Army grant. And we had a very interesting conversation after the site visit and walking through that. So information is getting out, people are becoming more aware, but like Mike said, community pressure is what will change that.
Okay. Yes, in the green.
People contribute to the free store.
How do they, or how many?
How do people contribute to?
Sure. So we have a volunteer that is in the free store from 9 till 12.
I mean, if I'm moving and I want to give my dishware and all of that to the free store, how do I do it?
Yes, so we have a volunteer that works there every day, so you can actually just bring it to our location. We're up at Good Counsel, and you can go to our website, which is partnersforhousing.org, and our free store hours are there, as well as a map on how to get to us. So you can actually just come Monday through Friday, 9 till 12 and 1 to 4, and bring those things. We have a loading dock, and we have carts and usually staff that can help you unload your vehicles as well.
and then we'll get you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm so new to this, so I have to ask some very basic questions.
That's good.
But the thing I don't know is, how do the homeless people find out where the shelter is, and how can they be assured that when they get there, they'll have a space?
All good questions. So how do homeless individuals in Mankato know where the shelter is, and how are they guaranteed a space? So last year, the way it ran, it was Sunday night was our check-in night, and Centenary was the central location. So they would come here to check in, and that was, the network is pretty good in town, so people kind of help each other figure it out. They would come and check in, and then they were guaranteed a bed for the entire week. So we would fill up pretty quickly, and they would know that if they had signed in on a Sunday night, and as long as they showed up every night by 7 o'clock to check in, that they were guaranteed a bed for the rest of the week. And then we did transportation from here to wherever the shelter was. That will be changing a little bit for this year, but we don't have that all nailed down yet.
So when they get there, do they get supper then?
Yes, yep, we had meals every night.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. Just when we first started this, we said, okay, it's going to be 7, 8 o'clock. Everyone's just going to want like a snack, so we could just give them a snack. And
Snack grew into
well, I think it was the Church of North Mankato.
Crossview.
That provided, it wasn't a 12-course meal, but gosh darn it, it
was
wasn't.
13.
It was, yeah. Compared to the first week here, we literally had snacks, and we're like, yeah, we kind of dropped the ball on that. So the game got upped, and it was really an opportunity for fellowship through the whole thing. That was the piece that I think, again, that relationship building as volunteers with the guests came into play. That all of a sudden it's like, wow, let's have a conversation over some food, and you know, it's church that always scores points. So
Always churches are good at food. Yeah, Darla, you have that.
This is more of a logistic question, but what does the facility need to have as far as size and separation of rooms and stuff
In order to host? Very little. You need to have space. We do request, she asked, what does a facility need in order to host the shelter? So facilities need to have a space where we can separate out men and women. And then we also try to separate out families. So if we have families, they would have their own spaces. Some churches that works really well, some churches that didn't work as well. Oh yeah, we do have these mics for all of you to utilize. And then other than that, facilities, enough restrooms, you know, a couple restrooms that people can use. The cots, the bedding, all of that is delivered to the site at the beginning of the week, and that's all set up, ready to go. Nope, showers, everybody can come back here to Centenary in the morning, and Centenary has showers and laundry, so those are not requirements of host sites at all. If they have them, that's great, but not a requirement. All right, other questions? Eric, do you want to run it? Oh, it's Jamie. Jamie's loud. Oh, she'll.
What I will say, so, one thing with the Lamb Street project that I'll get on the mic. Basically, I have a question about the Lamb Street project. You said it's not directly for homelessness, and you said that you guys have about 31 units in town that you work with people who are possibly needing it because they have a felony, criminal background, or some kind of a charge that would preclude them, eviction, stuff like that. Is the Lamb Street project going to be something that's going to work with folks with that kind of, because we not only need affordable housing in this town, we need accessible housing in this town.
Jen used the right word I missed earlier, and that's the transitional. It's folks that need services in some capacity to continue on that journey of self-sufficiency.
Okay.
So their plan is to bring some of those resources on site. So it won't be a matter that they have to figure out a way to get across town by 9 a.m. for a meeting, those type of things. So it's going to be a collaborative effort to bring those services on site as well.
Yeah, but I'm thinking like accessibility-wise, I'm talking about if somebody comes to me and they say, I need housing, then I have to ask them 3 very important questions before I can even start. Do you have a felony? Do you have a credit barrier?
I understand that, and I would say it's premature at this point to know exactly how that rolls, just because they're going to know in September if they've got all the financing that they need to be able to move forward with the project, and that there's some stipulations with that.
Tell me
So
what
I
I want to
think
hear,
it-
Mike.
I will.
I think it
You want me
is,
to lie to you? I'm not that type of politician.
it is Common Bond Housing though that's
Yes.
doing it, isn't it? And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
historically across the state, they tend to remove those barriers.
Yeah, it's,
So it
it's
is
the
more
same folks
accessible.
who've done projects in St. Peter locally. They did one here in Mankato, and I'm going to drop a name because I cannot remember which one of their projects. They were in town 25 years ago, so it's one of the older facilities. But they've been in Mankato before with that process, so it isn't unique per se, but it's going to happen.
Okay, then let me ask you another question real quick. Now, I had talked to some people, you're talking about $4,000 before a person can move in. Well, we're pretty familiar with a lot of those landlords as well. And they aren't places that I would like to send people to live oftentimes, but they are people who work with felony friendly. If you tell me you've got a felony, if you tell me that you've got an unlawful detainer, if you tell me you have bad credit, that automatically will take out any of the management companies. So you know the frustration that I'm dealing with when I have somebody, I have to ask them, do you have a connection to Mankato? Because if you don't, you're probably really better to go to another town, and that stinks, but it's because we don't have that available. I guess what I'm wondering is there, what's happening with that? Like you said, there's tax credits for a lot of these people that come in and do these big structures. Is there like a tax benefit for somebody who's gonna come in and maintain not only an affordable but an accessible housing unit? Is there ordinances? Somebody told me there was an ordinance that if you have a drug-related charge and a landlord rents to you here, and that's in your history, and this was from a housing place, that then they can be charged for renting if you know, basically, are there a lot of barriers for landlords to be renting to people, or is it just personal risk that they're concerned about?
You know, the having the university in this community changed the dynamic of how housing and rental occurs. Because a lot of our ordinance is written in the context of they're drinking at 3 a.m. on a Thursday night until Friday morning and causing ruckus in the neighborhood. So some of those ordinances don't apply correctly to, I will say, regular people. So, you know, I had someone email me just Sunday that, you know, on Porter Avenue, which is up in the Highland Park area, someone was shooting off fireworks at 3 a.m. and why doesn't the city do something about it? And my response was, have you called 911? That's step one. Step two is you have a neighborhood association and address it with them and see if there's a way, since Porter is a 1 block long street, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out who's doing this. Secondary, and I don't mean to make it completely light, but it's like, some of this is in place by just having conversations. The other part is if you rely on the ordinance, that means we've probably given up all the other options ahead of time. Now, if we haven't even tried the other options, which is having those conversations, you know, I've got a good friend who's got 1 unit available. It's $500 a month. They allow pets. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. 9 takers in 6 minutes through the Facebook posts. You know, I mean, MIT put together a living wage calculator for all of the United States, and they have Mankato, North Mankato, Metropolitan Statistical Area as one of those entities in there. So a person in Mankato could make $11.37 an hour and afford a $617 a month rent, along with other expenses of life. And that's true. But I can say that there's probably less than 200 units across the whole town that are in that price point. Now that's a single person. If you add a child in, that wage goes up to $23.96 because you have to consider transportation and childcare. So I know I can't go to my boss and say I'd like a $23 raise, or and most of our employers in Mankato will not accept that. So that's part of the challenge, is where do you find that happy spot? You know, could the city of Mankato put in rent control? Absolutely, we could. But is that truly going to solve our problem? Because it's really a lack of units right now. I mean, there's units being built that fill up quite quick. I mean, again, I'll reference Mr. Drummer's properties over by the East End Hy-Vee. The other, we have a friend who just moved in, is moving in August 1st. The building that, when she looked at it, wasn't even completed. She's moving in August. The building next to it's being built and is 2/3 already committed. But that's a market rate situation. No one in the world of housing is in it to lose money, so they're not interested in trying to make something that's going to be in that $600 to $700 a month range, which is what a single person can afford. That's the unfortunate thing. So does the city come in and demand that, and then create space and places to be built for that price point? We could, but I think that's a bigger, broader community discussion that we have to have. That, again, I'm not sure we're ready to have that discussion as a community. So. But they don't offer tax credits for that range. That's the challenge.
So that's where thinking outside the box as advocates falls on all of us.
And I will say this, and on that note, outside the box, and this discussion occurred several times throughout the weeks of the shelter. Well, would the city allow the little mini houses to be put up that you've heard about? I mean, churches have done this all around the country where they put them on their property. And the answer is yes. If it's within the mission of the church, the city would allow it because you'd be putting it on your own property and it would be allowed to be done on your property. Now, with the presumption that you provide sewer, water, electrical, heat, those basic necessities. But sure, now I think I look at our building here and say, yeah, we could fit 15 to 20 of those on the parking lot, but what are we going to do it on Sunday? And I mean, that, it's funny, but yet the reality is, yeah, we could all put them on our properties, but where are you going to move them to? Because we all need the parking on at least one day a week. But again, it's an ancillary use of the mission of the church, so it's an acceptable use, and you could literally buy one tomorrow and put it on your lot as your church as long as it's in your mission. But would one or two make a difference? Yeah, for one or two people, but we need several hundred. And so it's a matter of how do we do that. Now, can you put them on a regular lot? Sure. They'll work. You just create a foundation underneath it. That's the bare minimum. I mean, we are in Minnesota, so there's just a little bit of requirement. But it can happen. Again, outside the box, it's there, but it's the dollars and cents.
Nancy.
I was really impressed with the cooperation. I was doing the overnight at our church, and so the grandma, the mama, and two teenage kids come upstairs, going to leave to come for breakfast. I said, are we going to school today? And the mother immediately said, I homeschool. And immediately I thought, how do you homeschool if you don't have a home? But, of course, you let the computers here be available, the library, and for children who don't have the clothes that the other kids in the school have and so on, it's an obvious answer for them. All through this program, I watched how different people pitched in. Even people came who weren't part of the cooperating churches, and they came to our church and helped. I am so pleased that I got to see the face of homelessness. I'm sorry about it, but it changed me.
Thank
can't
you.
Build these relationships and not have it change you.
Thanks for being willing to do that, to be vulnerable and assume that you didn't know and open to learning about that. That's incredible.
All right, we got one more over here, and then I think we'll start wrapping up. All right, get that microphone.
I'm from Hosanna Lutheran. I run the Journeys program up there. We're heading into our 4th year with that. And the Journeys program, if you're not familiar with it, is a bunch of care. We do celebrate recovery from drugs and addictions. We have pornography groups. We have grief and divorce groups and mental illness, struggling with depression. And we do a meal every Tuesday night as well. We have some that come from various places that just like to come and eat and don't go to the groups, and that is totally great with us. We have, I love them coming and getting to know them, and I would love to have them come to our worship time that we have on Tuesday nights too. But one of the things we encountered, especially last year, was so we got some people that were coming, but they said, I can't stay for the large group or the small group thing because I have to be back at the church that's hosting by 7. And so that was a huge barrier for them. Now some of them talked to some people that said, if you're there at the program, we will give you that extension of time so that you can still come and not have a place to stay tonight. So I guess I'm looking for ways that we can partnership. Our building is full many days and most evenings, so I don't know the logistics of how we could host, but we definitely want to try to help financially and meals, volunteers, anything that we can do to help. This is many of the people that come to our programs have been living in cars, in a tent, under whatever. And so we are always trying to, I often will put them up in a hotel for a few nights, but we can't, So one of my questions too then is, if they come to me on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night, what do I do? Is there a connection so they have to be there on Sunday night in order to have a place for the week? Or, because Salvation Army has never, they have not been a help. We always try to tell them, go and see what they can offer, and they come back, they're full, they don't have money, they don't have this, they don't have that. So that's what we hear all the time. So I'm just wondering how we can better, and is there a way then that I can be a part somehow? I'm on staff at Hosanna. Can we be a part of the connection that you have for the services and the who's getting help here and there, so that we can better coordinate and help with some of these people as well?
Yes to all of those questions.
Okay.
We just need to go to coffee and we'll solve all the problems.
Yeah, so this is a longer conversation, so I'm glad you're here tonight. I will say that recovery is one of the major issues that people who are homeless face.
Right.
Recovery from all
Lots
kinds
of
of things.
Yep.
Trauma and addiction and, all sorts of things. But we are not always able to get people to and from those recovery services.
So the transportation is a part of it.
Transportation is a big issue because we have people that have all kinds of schedules and all kinds of things going on. And so our answer, if people talk to us about it, is as long as we know when you're coming and that you're coming, you can come anytime. So if you have a recovery group especially that you need to go to, that's part of this transition out of homelessness.
Who would be the contact person that I would then say, I've got 3 people here that this Tuesday night that are hoping they have a place to stay tonight, but they want to come to treatment tonight?
Yeah, so there are a few answers to that question. Okay. If Connection Shelter is open, if it's during our open season, you can always call our shelter phone, and we can give you that number, and we will let you know if we have openings. We're full on a Sunday night, but that didn't mean that on Tuesday we were full. Because somebody might be working overnight, so they're not going to be in, or somebody might have to go and see a family member, so they're not in for a couple of nights. We just couldn't guarantee, but if you call, we'd be able to say, yes, we have space, or no, we don't have space. You can always call partners. You can, the best thing to do is to get people, so if you encounter, and this is an answer for everybody in the room, if you encounter somebody who needs housing, the best thing to do is to send them somewhere that does this vulnerability index. So partners can do it. They can always call partners. MVAC is another great place to send people, especially if it's during the day. They have a lot of staff that are doing these. And once people do this index, it's basically a questionnaire about what are all of your risk factors, and it ranks people. So who needs housing and services the most at any given moment. Then they're on the list for a wide variety of services in a wide area. I think it's 20 counties, or is it 9?
Well, it's actually across the state.
It's
We're
across the
part
state.
of a 20-county region, but people can say, I have family in Duluth, that's where I want to end up. And so they can make that contact, and then providers in that area could pull them from that list.
Right, and that's how they would get connected to the longer term services. But very often, if we know that there's somebody who needs housing on a given night, we can talk to the coordinators of the church that are hosting and say, we know you had 25 or 24 last night. Could you do 27 tonight?
Do you have a closet?
And very often the answer to that is yes. So we did turn people away, but very often we figured out how to make it work. And especially if we were getting calls from churches that we have relationships with, then we were trying extra hard to make sure that we could house those people. So I would say we should have a longer conversation about Hosanna's involvement, because we would love to have you on board in whatever capacity. Don't rule out hosting, by the way, because remember, for any of you who are not host sites, who are connected to a church, or any kind of service organization, if there's a building, it doesn't have to be a church, you're really committing to 3 weeks out of the season. So at my church, there are some weeks that are incredibly busy, and there are some weeks that are not as busy. Usually, given all the church's different schedules, if a church says, you know, we really need to host, and some of our larger congregations that are busier buildings have said, we really need to host this week because we don't have as much programming going on. We're flexible. We can make this work. We can keep, we talked about flexible transportation time. So if you need people to show up at 8 instead of 7:30, we can work with that. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible to make it an option for more people to host. And it's also sort of a trial thing. So we had a lot of churches that said, I don't know what we can commit to. And most of the time we said, well, could you just do 1 week? We have an open week here this last week of January. Just try it. Almost all of them hosted again after that first try. So there's lots of options, and especially if you are on staff, you would be a great person if you're dealing with homeless population to be part of the homeless response team in Mankato as well. Yeah. They meet every month, and that's where you meet all of the providers that are working with people, and there's great cooperation among organizations.
More about that sometime too?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Erica, it's the third Wednesday of the month, right? At MVAC in the afternoon,
Wednesday of every month?
3:30 to, no,
3 to 4:30 usually.
Yeah, and one of the gals that I was talking with, it's kind of, you were alluding to it earlier, and she said she stayed for a while at you know, the various churches or whatever. She had, I think, 2 toddlers, a baby and a toddler, and she would come over here and have breakfast, and then so she talked about how hard it is. What do you do during the day until you can get, when it's winter time and you've got 2 toddlers, you don't have a car, you have no place to put stuff, you've got these 2 babies that can't be outside all day long. So she would go over to the library for a while. That was her routine. She went to the library, then she went over to the city building for a while and would sit and read, and she kind of tried to find places where to hang out. She, I think, sometimes tried to go up to the mall. That's further, and so yeah, it's very eye-opening. Yeah, and they need naps, and they're hungry, and yeah.
And it's cold. Yeah, Jason is going to be our last.
It was just an extra thing to put on top, is that if you don't want to host an overnight, but you want to still be a massive hero to those people who need some place to go, consider hosting some sort of thing on a holiday. Because holidays are lovely for a great many people, but not when it means that many of the buildings and services and things that people to are closed. So while we don't have day shelters going necessarily, if you are capable of hosting some sort of event or or a lunch or something on a day like New Year's Day, they will love you because they don't know what they're going to do in the holiday season.
Right, because, yeah, to Jason's point, those holidays float weekdays. And, it's a goofy thing for all of us because our Tuesday's now all of a sudden a Saturday because it's a holiday, but there is no library, there is no government center, all of a sudden doors are closed that are routinely open on a Tuesday, and that changes a dynamic that we ran into, and we were able to adjust, I think, overall, and thankfully, but that was I will say a very critical moment.
So I think with all of that, thank you. Thank you for having the passion to be here tonight, to listen to each other, to listen to us. There is a lot we can do in this community. We've seen it happen in the last year, how we really changed the dialogue, how many lives, mostly our own, I think, were shifted greatly by the people that we met and the ways that we were able to share space and to share stories. We can continue to make change. As you leave tonight, feel free to catch any of us if you have some more questions. Right outside the door, we have those fabulous dip jars. If you want to hear the little ding as you donate your $15 to house someone, they're wonderful. There'll be some board members out there to help you with that. We also have some sign-up sheets if you are interested in getting involved in some of the volunteer aspects. Jen's got a bunch of information out there about partners as well. I'm sure Jen will take money as well. You can just hand her money.
I'll even make the sound ching or whatever it is.
I won't take money because I'm a politician.
Yeah, I'll not allow Mike to take any money tonight. And we also have captured all of this on YouTube tonight, so if there are forums at your church you want to be able to share what the discussion was this evening, we will throw a link up on the Connections website soon. But again, just thank you all for your passion, for your courage, and we can do this. So let's keep changing lives.
Thank you.